Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey, and welcome to, or welcome back to, the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to be the co-host for this show, usually with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. But today, it's just me. Craig's not with me today, but we're doing more of sort of a career-oriented podcast. We do these somewhere around every 6 weeks or so, because we're always trying to shake it up and bring all of you interesting interviews and other ideas that can help our listeners enhance and grow their careers and just make their companies better places to work. And I think today might be one of those shows. Today, I have with me Joe Hirsch. And Joe, he is one of these people that he helps explain things to other people, to put it simply. That's what he does. He is a communication coach. He's a TEDX speaker. He's worked with large companies and small companies. He writes for magazines like Inc. and Forbes and Harvard Business Review. The guy does a lot of stuff. He does this mainly through his company, which is Semaca Partners. But he's also just an all-around nice guy who likes to share his thoughts. And so I thought, who could we talk to in this world of, we've been quarantined for like 12 weeks through this whole coronavirus crisis, and many companies are now starting to bring people back to work. And I thought, you know what? That might not be easy for everybody. This has been a long couple of 3 months. So Joe, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Hey, Thom. And yeah, it has been a very long past few months, hasn't it?
You know, I made the joke months ago that after we were 1 month into it, that wow, the last month has been a long year. But now
I know some people want a refund on their 2020.
Yeah, this whole idea, I was so excited about 2020 vision. Now I want that vision in the rearview mirror.
I know. It's been hard. It's been really hard, but it's encouraging that business is starting to reopen and that teams are starting to come back together. I think the question then becomes, what does that look like? What does work look like in this whole new world? And what does it even mean to be a team anymore when we're all working remotely?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right, that we have sort of this whole issue of, what does it look like to work remotely, and how do we now work not remotely after we've done it for so long? So, Joe, can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, so I come from a learning and development background. I'm a trained educator. I'm a Ph.D., so I've taught all the way little people up to big people. And about 5 years ago, started to scale that work through the business that I created, Semaca Partners, which is a communications firm that helps leaders at all levels communicate with greater impact. I like to think that it takes the high-level research and makes it accessible to people of varying backgrounds and levels. And I do most of my work through the stage, though that stage now is more of a virtual stage. So both in-person and online trainings, consulting with leaders of small, medium-sized enterprises all the way up to Fortune 100s, and then really helping people understand the principles of effective communication so that they can communicate with impact. And I like to share that work through various writing outlets as well as training people face-to-face. Father of 4, husband of 1.
4, wow, that's a lot of kids. So you, how old are they? Have you been homeschooling them?
Yeah, I feel like in addition to being trained as an educator, I am now basically my kid's educator, like everyone else out there. Our kids are ages 7 to 14, which is a nice little range. And every age group has its own challenges. So we're experiencing all of those challenges at once. But it's been, to be honest, it's been a pleasant surprise. All this recaptured family time, taking away morning commutes and morning routines and hassles, and just really being together and being present in each other's lives. I know that a lot of other people feel the same way. And it's been a blessing despite the burdens.
Although I'll be totally transparent and totally honest, the idea of having 4 kids between the ages of 7 and 14 while, on quarantine makes me quiver with fear. I've never been so happy to have adult children ever in my life than during the last 3 months.
There's a method to the madness. That's all I can say. Sometimes more madness than methods, but yeah.
So from your experience and your point of view through this, as companies look to, now that we have remotely managed people for 3 months and said, stay home, slowly but surely, it's different in different states. It's different for different industries. People are going to start pulling people back to that office. From your viewpoint, what's going on? What's going to happen? And what do we need to be watching out for?
Yeah. The only problem with predictions is that you have to look into the future. So with a grain of salt, I would say there are a few things that I've noticed in talking to clients and talking to leaders who are starting to bring people back. And I can share some of the concerns that they've shared with me, and then maybe offer you some of the solutions that I've talked through with them. So there are smart shifts that we can start to make as leaders when we bring people back to work, because let's face it, the nature of work has changed. And even though companies have adapted, some more nimbly than others, to these crazy times, being home and not being huddled in an office has caused us to reconsider the wisdom and the sacredness of some of these conventional practices, like the way that we source ideas, the way that we hold our meetings, and even the way that we share feedback. So let's focus on those 3 areas and talk through some smart shifts that leaders can make to help their team's creativity and productivity continue to rise when the reopening unfolds with more force. How's that sound?
That sounds great. So let's start at the beginning. What are some of those things people can do?
Let's start with how we source ideas. So typically, when you want to get ideas from your team, we rely on brainstorming practices that, according to science, really do more to suppress good ideas than activate them. And we know all the reasons for that.
So why is that? I mean, I love brainstorming. Why is that something that suppresses ideas?
Well, in that process of gathering ideas with everyone trying to talk at the same time, typically more dominant types are going to rise to the surface, and their ideas gain traction, which will suppress the ideas held by maybe more introverted or inhibited types. And the very nature of groupthink sets in. So once one idea is presented and it gets a little bit of early support, tends to snowball and catch fire. And then, though that was actually a mixed metaphor, snowballs that catch fire. I don't think that made a lot of sense now.
It made sense to me, because my snowballs burst into flames.
I have been known to mix metaphors on more than one occasion.
Well, I don't really know a lot about snowballs because I grew up in Southern California and I live in Texas. So as far as I know, snowballs catch fire all the time.
Yeah, there you go. As people start to share their ideas, adoption sets in rather quickly. And so if you and I were in a brainstorm and you're a more dominant personality, I'm more withdrawn, your idea probably is going to surface first. My idea may not even get airtime, and at the very least, early ideas tend to catch on and are accepted more quickly than others. So this idea of idea suppression is a problem. There's also this issue of production blockage. Production blockage basically is the phenomenon where people are going to speak in cycles, right? So when we're brainstorming, we're going to go one by one by one by one, and everyone's going to take their turn. But with that artificial framework of only talk when it is your turn, people may not have a chance to really think through or share their ideas in real time. And so one of the switches that I help business leaders make is to move away from brainstorming and to adopt something known as brain writing. This idea that rather than have everybody talk at once, have them think and write at the same time. And whether you're trying to design a new product, or whether you're trying to manage a new problem, this framework can be very effective. And it's pretty simple.
So when you say brain writing, it's WRIGHT, not RIGHT.
Like writing a paper,
Yes.
RITE.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. like you're going to write everything down at the same time. People are going to write at once rather than talk simultaneously. So
I just
it would make
spelled writing wrong. That's hysterical. But yes, I know we were on the same
so
page. I
mixed
just
metaphors.
I added a GH to it.
So there you go. We've mixed metaphors and we have homonyms. So what else can we do right today? Okay.
Moving along.
Okay. Yeah. Take three. So if you and I were going to be engaged in a brain write, a WRITE, then we'll have a problem that's on the table. And you and I will take a moment to kind of reflect on what we think may be a solution. We'll write that idea down. And then we swap those cards around the table so that everyone gets to see everyone else's ideas. And your only focus right now is not on what's wrong with that idea, but what's right about it. And where's the kernel of good? Where's the potential that lies within that idea? And how can we make that idea even larger than it already is? So rather than relying on people to take turns to speak only when they're allowed to, and then hoping that the most dominant types don't suck the air out of that brainstorm, brain writing gives everyone an opportunity to think simultaneously with more equity, more reflection, and ultimately to tap into the genius of the group by letting all the ideas rise to the surface and using a partnership approach to make those ideas even better.
So what you're suggesting is as people come back to work, maybe it's the time to shift our culture a little bit of how we do things, how we communicate, how we have meetings, how we succeed in teams, and take advantage of the last 3 months and say, when we come back, it can look different.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of time to think on our own, right? Because sitting at our own desks, not surrounded by lots of other people, without the banter of the break room or the water cooler, we really have been alone in our own thoughts and in our own worlds for a while. And it would be a shame to not tap into the genius of the whole team by sourcing ideas from everybody and using this very simple framework to allow the best ideas to rise to the surface.
So what else can we do?
I think the way that we hold these meetings is also super important. You know, a lot of times we focus on who's coming to the meeting or what the meeting's going to be about. So thinking about maybe paring down the number of invites or circulating agendas ahead of time. Honestly, I think the real opportunity here is not who and what, but how. And here's where I think leaders have an opportunity to introduce more reflection into their meetings. And rather than thinking about how to hold more effective meetings, we should be thinking about how to hold more reflective meetings. And the way to do that is just by introducing opportunities for this reflection at the very start of the meeting. So let's imagine you as our team leader, Thom, were presenting a problem that needs a solution. We were going to think about how to move this product forward in its workflow. So rather than come to the meeting and ask everyone to submit ideas, and then you're back to the same old problems that we talked about with brainstorming, with dominant personality types and groupthink, source options ahead of time. Ask people to submit approaches or alternatives before the meeting even convenes. And then at the start of the meeting, circulate those approaches or those solutions to the whole group and give everyone in that meeting a moment to think about the relative strengths and weaknesses of each position. When the meeting starts with people having a chance to think together rather than speak together. Again, really giving people the chance to process and percolate without distractions, interruptions, or interference. Then you can go around the table virtually or together and ask people to present their ideas, first maybe starting with one particular option and having everyone go around the table and talk about relative strengths and weaknesses, then having the conversation that way. Creates more focus and intention around the same problems that you would otherwise be solving in a traditional approach. but gives people more opportunity to really think through things before the back and forth begins. And if you really want to get creative about how these meetings are held, make them stand-ups, not just standing up around the table for the sake of efficiency of time, but give people an opportunity to literally stand up, walk the room, and jot ideas down on whiteboards or big, large post-it paper for people to create almost like a talking wall of ideas where they put out their ideas and suggestions, almost like a gallery walk, where people can walk from idea to idea, put down their thoughts, have people read and reflect in real time, and then bring people back to the table to discuss what everyone learned and thought.
So in your research and having worked with so many companies, organizations that do and have done in the past this type of team interaction, for lack of a better term coming to mind, what are some of the benefits that these companies have?
First, better ideas. They're getting more ideas, and they're usually getting better quality of ideas because those ideas, before they adopted these smart switches, never really made it to the surface. So better ideas, better culture. People are interacting with each other. There's a culture of listening, of respect, of patience, and ultimately of humility, as we all recognize that every single person around the table has something to contribute, and each person is a valuable member of our team. So better ideas, better teamwork, and frankly, better results. Because when you bring people together with more intention and greater reflection, the likelihood of achieving better results is much higher because the practices that you're introducing are more streamlined, more time efficient, are producing better results, and ultimately are contributing to a fatter bottom line, better workflow, better outcomes.
So, but over the last few months, a lot of companies, people have been ripped apart from, for a lot of people, it's their social structure, but just their work structure, their work culture. People have been sent home. I mean, how many hours a day do we each spend on Zoom meetings? I mean, it's,
yes,
it's kind of unreal. But as we look at all that, so we've had all this stuff happen. When we come back, isn't it going to be chaotic enough just to come back, much less sort of changing the way things happen?
So what's the old saying? Don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, right? And that's what happens so often when it comes to these moments of great change. We miss the opportunity to really change the way we think about the very nature of work, of tapping into the full value and potential of every team member. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to sort of hit a hard reset on how we've conducted business as usual and to adopt this new normal in a way that taps the full value of our employees, that really dives deeply into who we are as a unit and the work that we do and how we engage in that. And yeah, there's going to be a reorientation that has to take place, a reacclimation. It's like the first day of school all over again. But the benefit, Thom, is so strong, the upside is so high, that I think it would be a mistake to not take a moment and really reflect on the practices and procedures that we have in place, and to say to ourselves and to every member of our team, we know that there's been an upheaval. As things start to fit back together again, we want that picture to be more clear and more inclusive, more productive than it was before. And we have a chance to do that. So here are how we're going to approach these things, and be clear and be transparent and be honest. And that doesn't mean that you have to impose these smart switches or even all of these smart switches on your team. Use the opportunity to seek feedback. Use the opportunity to put out a few thoughts that you have. Here's where I'm thinking, team. What are your thoughts? And let people help you craft those new terms together. Ultimately, there'll be greater buy-in and greater participation.
So a lot of the people who listen to this podcast, they're not the team leader. And so if they're just part of a team, I'm sure some of them are listening going, wow, Joe is really smart. I love what he's saying. But my boss is a hierarchical, old school person. He'll never go for this. What does somebody do if they're going back into a situation where they're not in charge of making change, but they love the ideas you're talking about?
So even if you're not the decision maker, you can still be the leader. Because what does it mean to lead? It just means that you have followers. So if you're a member of a team, start to lead by example. Start to bring some of these smart switches into the everyday rhythms of your team's daily work. And if your boss is smart, he or she will realize that these smart switches aren't going to take a lot of time, aren't going to cost much money, if at all, and frankly, are going to lead to real results and real adaptation. So before you can create the change, be the change and start living these changes within your own teams.
So this kind of leads me to this thought of, Facebook and Twitter and some other big tech companies have announced, if you like working at home, you never have to come back to the office. Now, I think it's a little early to say never because we don't know what the long-term ramifications are. How do you think this everybody working from home for 3 months, followed by this now pull back, how do you think that's going to affect companies? Do you think this work from home will become way more common, or do you think the pendulum will just swing back?
A lot of people like working from home. They've realized not having to commute, not having to deal with traffic, not having to deal with external pressures, and maybe just the natural waste of a workday in an office is highly attractive. And I think that for many workers, they'd be willing to even trade comp for flexibility. And I think that's going to be the new ping pong table or in-house dry cleaning as we think about ways to attract and retain talent. Flexible arrangements, working from home. This is going to be top of mind, top of agenda for many workers. In fact, many young workers who like having a flexible schedule and who just want to get work done and then get on with their life. And I'm willing to bet that this is going to be top of every new employee's punch list when considering where to take their talents. Will my company support this? Will my company champion this? And as we consider all the different ways in which work is being redefined, where that work happens is going to be a big piece of that equation. I also think at the same time, however, employees need to demonstrate a certain level of competence and confidence, I think, in that decision process. They have to be able to demonstrate the ability to work from home and to breed enough trust in the eyes of their employers for that to happen. So maybe it is a perk that's offered right on the top of someone signing on. Maybe it's something you work your way into over time. But however that plays out, I do think that working in flexible arrangements are going to be a real sweetener for many employees as we go forward.
So looking at what you teach and what you talk about and this whole idea of communicate and how we can, do things like brainwriting and try to get to the solutions in a different way. If we go more remote, how do we do that?
How do we get people to demonstrate this confidence? How do they demonstrate the competence? Yeah, I think it's by having really clear objectives right off the top. And this is where the messages that leaders communicate every single day plays an important role. I teach an online course called The Language of Leadership. And in this course, people learn proven practical ways to create the conditions for very productive, very happy work environments. And for most managers, there's a fear that this is not something that comes natural to them, or it's going to take a lot of time. And the reality is that it doesn't. With just some smart switches in how we communicate the goals, how we shape the path, and how we measure success, you can actually, together with the employee, together with your team, really create a very workable framework that allows for clear tracking of goals and ultimately the conditions for high trust. And once managers and employees come to that arrangement, set those conditions, I do think there will come a time very quickly where people will be able to rise to a level of confidence and competence in the eyes of the employer, and they'll know that they'll have the chops to be able to work from home and be trusted to do that work the way that everyone hopes that it will be done.
So before we wrap this up, do you have any other advice for companies and individuals? Maybe it's two separate pieces of advice as we come back into the workplace on how they can make sure they succeed.
I think leaders should be humble and stay curious. Be humble about what you don't know. As we've seen over the past few months, there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that we can't know. And it's important for leaders to approach with that sense of humility, knowing that they just don't know everything. And that affects the way you have these feedback conversations. It affects the way we hold performance reviews. Be more humble about what you don't know about the life and the work of your employees and your team, because you'll be surprised by what you just don't know. And stay curious. Oftentimes we tend to go with what we already know. And there's a certain fixed nature to the way we go about our work every single day, relying on tried and true habits and procedures. I think it's an opportunity for all of us in this brand new landscape to be curious about exploring new techniques, new tools that may make a real difference in the way that work is performed. Maybe it's something that you've always wanted to know more about, a certain communication strategy or maybe a new leadership technique that you just didn't think you had the time to commit to. Or maybe it's a brand new approach to the way that you manage your teams or the way that you interact with your colleagues every single day. Use this time to be curious about a whole new world of work. Adopt a learn-it-all mindset that is focused on continuous learning and improvement. And we'll all be a lot better when we come back.
So Joe Hirsch, thank you so much for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. If somebody needs to find you, how do they do that?
Best place is on my website, joehirsch.me, HIRSCH.me, because I am me.
There you go, joehirsch.me. Well, again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everybody who tuned in. Please join us next week for more thoughts, ideas, and information around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.